My name is Renee, and I'm 31 years old. I used to believe that family was the one thing in this world you could always count on. No matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, your family would be standing in your corner. That belief held me together through a difficult childhood, through the confusion of growing up in a house full of secrets, through years of convincing myself that what I remembered couldn't possibly be real. But on the morning of September 14th, 7 years ago, I stopped believing in that fairy tale. Because on that morning, I walked into a police station and reported my own brother, Fletcher, for what he had done to me when I was a child. And by that same evening, my parents had already made their choice, and it wasn't me. Fletcher was 5 years older than me, and to the outside world, he was the golden child. Charming, confident, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately owned it. My parents adored him in the way parents sometimes adore a child who mirrors their own ambitions back at them. He was going to be successful. He was going to carry the family name with pride. Growing up, I had worshipped him the way little sisters often do, blindly, completely, with that particular kind of love that doesn't ask questions. But there were things that happened in the years between my ages of 8 and 13 that I spent 2 decades trying to bury. Things Fletcher did to me when no one else was home. Things I told myself I must have imagined, must have misunderstood, must have been too young to properly process. I was wrong on all 3 counts. The unraveling began quietly. A therapist. Weekly sessions I had started attending not for any dramatic reason, but simply because I had been struggling to sleep, struggling to maintain relationships, struggling to understand why certain situations triggered a panic in me that felt completely disproportionate to what was happening in front of me. My therapist, a calm and patient woman named Dr. Osei, never pushed me toward anything. But week after week, in that small office with the white noise machine outside the door, pieces of memory began rising to the surface like objects floating up from the bottom of a lake. And after 8 months of sessions, I finally said out loud, for the very first time in my life, what my brother had done to me. Saying it out loud changed everything. It made it real in a way that living with it silently never had. And once it was real, I couldn't put it back in the dark where I had kept it for so long. Dr. Osei didn't tell me what to do. She gave me time. But I knew, somewhere deep and certain inside myself, that I had to report it. Not for revenge. Not out of anger. But because silence had already cost me so much of my own life, and I refused to let it cost me one more day. The detective I spoke to was professional and thorough. She took my statement carefully and told me the investigation would take time. I drove home that afternoon feeling something I hadn't expected, not relief exactly, but a strange, terrifying clarity. I had told the truth. Whatever happened next, I had finally told the truth. What happened next was my parents calling me within 48 hours of the investigation beginning. Fletcher had contacted them the moment he was approached. My mother's voice on the phone was ice-cold in a way I had never heard directed at me before. She said I was destroying the family. She said I was making up stories to get attention. She said that she knew her son, and her son would never do something like that. My father was worse in a different way, quieter, more deliberate. He told me plainly that no daughter of his would do what I was doing. That I needed to retract my statement and come back to the family with an apology. When I refused, the line went silent for a long moment. Then he hung up. Within a week, I had been cut off completely. No calls. No texts. Extended relatives I had grown up with stopped responding to me. Family friends who had known me since I was a child looked through me at a cousin's wedding I attended a month later. Fletcher, meanwhile, was being embraced and defended at every turn. My parents hired him a lawyer within the first week. They attended every meeting. They stood beside him at every opportunity with the united, unshakable front of a family that had decided its version of the truth and would not be moved. For 5 years, I lived with that. I want you to understand what 5 years of that actually feels like, because it is not simply loneliness. It is a specific and relentless kind of pain that comes from being told by the people who were supposed to protect you that your pain is a lie. Every birthday that passed without a call. Every holiday I spent alone or with friends who were kind but couldn't fill that particular absence. Every time I saw a family together in an ordinary moment, at a grocery store, at a park, and felt that grief move through me like something physical. I kept going to therapy. I kept my job. I kept my apartment clean and my routine steady because structure was the only thing keeping me functional during those years. I did not know then that everything was about to change. The first call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 years after I had filed my report. I was at my desk at work when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. I had developed a habit over those years of letting unknown numbers go to voicemail, mostly because the early period after my report had brought a wave of hostile calls from extended family members who wanted to make sure I understood exactly what they thought of me. But something made me pick up that morning. A woman's voice, young, uncertain, speaking carefully like someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say but was still terrified to say it. She told me her name was Sienna. She told me she was 23 years old. And then she told me that Fletcher was her cousin on her mother's side, and that what I had reported, what I had been brave enough to report, had happened to her too. When I was 8 years old and she was 6, at a family gathering I barely remembered, in the back room of my grandmother's house, while the adults were laughing over dinner in the next room. I sat completely still at my desk for the entire duration of that call. I don't remember exactly what I said back to her. I remember that I cried, and that she cried, and that at some point I told her she was not alone and meant it with every part of myself. After I hung up, I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stood over the sink for a long time with the water running, staring at my own reflection, trying to absorb what had just happened. I had spent 3 years being told by my own family that I was a liar. And here was proof, in the trembling voice of a 23-year-old woman, that I was not. Sienna contacted the detective handling my case. 2 weeks later, a second woman came forward. Her name was Bridget, and she was 34, older than me, and had been carrying what Fletcher had done to her since she was 9 years old. She had been at my report hearing and had gone home that day and sat with her husband and finally, after 25 years, told him everything. It took her 3 more years to be ready to speak to investigators. I understood completely. There is no timeline for that kind of courage. A month after Bridget, a third woman contacted authorities. Then a fourth. The calls and disclosures came in waves over the following 18 months, each one a different woman, a different set of years. A different specific cruelty from a man who had moved through our extended family for decades with absolute confidence that he would never be held accountable. By the time the case went to trial, 7 women had come forward. Every single one of them was connected to our family. Cousins, a niece by marriage, a girl who had grown up next door to my grandparents and spent summers at family reunions. 7 women. All silenced for years by the same combination of shame, disbelief, and a family culture that protected Fletcher's image above everything else. The trial lasted 11 days. I was the first to testify, and I want to tell you what that felt like because I think people imagine courtroom moments as cinematic and empowering, and the reality is far more complicated than that. Walking into that courtroom and seeing Fletcher sitting at the defense table, older now, the charm still visible in the way he held himself, flanked by lawyers my parents had spent enormous money on, my legs felt like they were made of something unreliable. But I sat in that witness chair, and I looked at the jury. 12 ordinary people who had no reason to believe me or disbelieve me except for the truth of what I said, and I told them everything. Every detail I had spent 20 years trying not to remember. I spoke for nearly 4 hours. And when I was done, I walked out of that courtroom and sat on a bench outside in the cold air and breathed until I felt human again. One by one, the other 6 women testified after me. The courtroom was standing room only by the 3rd day. I sat in that gallery and watched each of them take the stand, and I want you to understand what it means to watch someone do the bravest thing they have ever done in their life. Sienna gripped the edge of the witness stand so hard her knuckles went white, but her voice never wavered. Bridget looked directly at the jury the entire time she spoke. The 7th woman, a 41-year-old named Colette who had flown in from another state, told her story in a voice so quiet and so steady that the entire room leaned forward to hear it. Fletcher was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 22 years. My parents were in the courtroom for the verdict. I saw my mother's face when the judge read the sentence. I had spent years imagining what I would feel in that moment: triumph, vindication, the satisfaction of finally being believed. What I actually felt was grief. Pure, uncomplicated grief for the mother I had needed her to be and the family we could have been if truth had been chosen over protection. I do not hate my parents, but I have accepted, fully and finally, that I cannot rebuild something with people who have never acknowledged what they chose. What I have instead is this. I have 7 women I will know for the rest of my life. I have a therapist who helped me find my voice when I had buried it so deep I forgot it existed. I have a life that is genuinely mine, not performing okayness for a family that required my silence, but actually, imperfectly, honestly mine. And I have the knowledge that speaking the truth, even when it costs you everything, is still the right thing to do. If you are carrying something like this in silence right now, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not destroying anything by telling the truth. The destruction was done by the person who harmed you. Your only job is to survive, and then, when you are ready, to speak. If this story moved you, if it made you feel less alone in any way, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories here, real, difficult, human stories about people who chose truth over silence and rebuilt their lives on the other side. You being here matters. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us.